Welcome back to the And Both podcast. My guest today is Dr. Ann Welsh, a clinical psychologist, executive coach, mom of four, and passionate advocate for working moms. Her career centers on supporting women, whether it's in her therapy practice focused on maternal mental health, her executive coaching work with women in male-dominated industries, or her consulting with organizations on how to better support working parents. In today's conversation, we're talking about what it means to balance ambition and motherhood, the systemic challenges women face at work, and why creating real change often starts with one person raising their hand and saying, "This isn't working." She is an absolute dream to talk to, and I followed Dr. Welsh for a while online, and she has a ton of great content on LinkedIn. So if you are someone that wants to learn more, I would highly recommend you check her out there. But for now, here she is. Welcome to And Both, a podcast about what it really looks like to put yourself on the list while raising kids and doing all the other things life asks of you. I'm your host, Ashley Blackington, and on this show, you'll hear conversations with moms who are figuring it out in their own ways, plus a few solo episodes from me from time to time. It's not about having all the answers, it's about sharing stories, learning from each other, and knowing we don't have to choose between either or when we're living in the middle of and both. Let's get into today's episode. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the And Both podcast. My guest today is Dr. Ann Welsh. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
I am really excited to be here. You and I connected a while back and both got busy living life. And so it's a little bit of a reconnect and tell people all about what you do. But before we get started, how about if you let people know what you'd like them to know about you?
Sure. Well, in kind of true And Both space, I'm a mom of four, so we'll lead with that. My kids are 16, 14, 11, and 9. There was a period where I felt like I lived in a preschool because I had 4 kids, 6 and under, and it was very loud in our house. And nowadays, I feel like I'm just an Uber driver from the hours of 3 o'clock to 8 o'clock at night. But it's fun. The thing I always say about raising tweens and teens right now is it's fun and wonderful in a way I totally didn't expect. Like, nobody told me how cool this part of parenting is. And maybe it's because I hated middle school myself personally. But as a parent, I'm really enjoying it. So anyway, that's the mom side. And then in terms of my work, I'm a clinical psychologist. So about half of my work is a therapy practice that's focused on maternal mental health. And then I'm also an executive coach. And through that, I support women often in male-dominated fields. So STEM, healthcare, law, finance, things like that, and working mothers in that as well. And I also run a working mothers group. And then I do some consulting and some kind of organizational level work that like workshops and talks and really trying to help organizations figure out how to better support their working parents. And so I kind of fell into a portfolio career without even knowing that was a thing until somewhat recently. But all of it's really centralized on supporting women and working mothers in lots of different ways.
I love it. It's one of those, like when you buy a new car, this relates, but when you buy a new car and all of a sudden that's the car you see everywhere.
Yeah.
It's like, I was one of those LinkedIn people that was kind of like, oh, that looks really interesting. Oh, that looks really interesting. And then when I decided to take a very active or a more active approach to LinkedIn, all of a sudden you were in everything that I saw because I was down that rabbit hole of like working parents and support systems and all of this stuff. And all of a sudden I was like, who is this woman? I need to meet her because she is everywhere in these podcasts and with people that like I, have a lot of respect for. And it was very cool. So I'm excited for LinkedIn in this capacity.
Yeah, LinkedIn is funny because my whole first part of my career was as a therapist. And as a therapist, the goal is not visibility of you. And so I only joined LinkedIn recently when I was trying to do more of that organizational piece and kind of get seen by, people who had the pull to draw me into organizations as a way of supporting working parents. And I have loved it, even though I don't do a ton of social media separately, because I get to meet such interesting people and make connections. And as someone that works by myself, it's been nice. It feels like I have colleagues out there in a way that I didn't for very many years.
Yeah, I strongly identify with that. Like as a solo founder and hosting the podcast, it's like I have like an office without having an office. And, when people talk about like return to work and stuff like that, I'm like, I can reach out to someone who knows exactly all of the things that I'm looking for, connect with them, and then carry on back to work. Like it's a cool ecosystem, I think, right now.
Yeah. And for me too, it feels like a way of supporting more people. right? Like there are not enough hours in the day for me to see every single person that might have a need as a therapy client or as a coaching client for that matter. But this is a way for me to just put pieces, at least, of valuable information or validation or tools out there on a regular basis so that people get stuff for free that are needing it.
Mm-hmm.
And so it feels like a way to give back as well.
Yeah, it's that raising awareness piece, right? Like
Yeah.
if people don't know that there is an option out there, I was just talking with another mom. We're doing a LinkedIn Live that launches later this week, but in that we talked about 50% of caregivers don't identify as caregivers. That was sort of like the beginning statistic, and she was like, "What do you mean? Like how can that happen?" And I think it's that idea, right? Like I go to work, I do the thing that I need to do. I go home, I take care of my family, yada, yada, yada. Or I take care of these people that I'm taking care of, but I'm not a caregiver. I'm just doing the thing that needs to get done. So then you start to see things like what you're posting online, talking about working parents and talking about, resources that people can have, creating resources for people to have. And all of a sudden it's this visibility goes up and people are like, oh, wait a minute. I don't have to feel like I'm sticking my head in a blender Monday through Friday.
Right. Like it doesn't have to be kind of misery or just white knuckling it, right? I think I talk to a
Yeah.
lot of clients about, and that we do this in so many capacities and, not just working parents, but of this, like, I'm just going to hold on tight till it gets better and kind of grit through it. And that's a tool we can use. Yes, for sure. There are times in our life where that is kind of the only option. That shouldn't have to be your entire life, right? That can't be all of your working parenthood experience because you're going to burn out, right? There is no resiliency there and there's no joy and it can be different. And that's like a lot of the work I do is kind of how do we do that internally? And what are some of the internal shifts we can make? And then I'm also doing that advocacy work and change work at a systems level because part of the problem is the systems level, right? So I'm kind of attacking it from both sides.
I love that. So when you have someone come in, like, so a big corporation is like, we finally nailed it down to like this being a problem, and you come in, what are some of the things, what does that process look like for you moving into that space? And what are some of the things that you maybe have noticed being more common or more common threads among these larger companies?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I would say it almost never works the way that you just did, which I think is part of the problem, right? So what typically happens is someone, usually a woman, not always, but almost always a woman, at any level says, this is a problem for our organization and I am going to do something about it. And they bring me in, right? And then there's usually a long process of talking to the organization and kind of helping them understand why this matters. And the biggest convincing story that I need to help organizations see, is that they frame it as an individual problem. So what happens is organizations say, oh, she left because she wanted to be with her kids. Oh, she left because all women want to actually be home with their babies. Or she left because she had a sick parent, right? So it's always that individual didn't stay because they made the choice to leave. It was their choice because of something else outside of work. But what I know, and what most of us in this field know, right, is that that's not always how it plays out. And in fact, that's less often the case. Usually, people want to stay in some capacity and cannot because they are not supported or there is not the flexibility. So that's the very first switch I have to make, right? Is helping them recognize that, no, this is not an individual case-by-case problem. This is a broader issue that your workplace isn't supporting women. And then from there, it's trying to figure out what are the movable levers, right? Again, it's rare. It would be wonderful if I came into an organization and they said, we have oodles of money and flexibility. We're going to extend our leave to a year and, do tons of coaching and all of that stuff. It's usually, here's where we can have some give and working within the give to make the system better. So great example, right? I spoke with an organization that had, I think, a 12-week leave that included short-term disability, and they were not going to budge. Like that was not a flexible option for them. But someone had brought me in and said, hey, we need to do a better job supporting our working parents. Not surprisingly, in this organization, the leadership group of 20 involved 3 women and one that was a mother, right, out of 20. So, this is the background we're working with. And with them, it was, okay, you're not going to change the leave. I'm not going to be able to convince you of that. I hear that this is a hard and fast boundary, but where can we make movement? And with them, it was, they brought me in to do a training on the parental leave process and how to support that for managers so that they were better equipped to deal with it for their direct reports. We talked about what are some of the flexibility options that we can bring in. So in their case, again, it wasn't always around hours worked, but could there be more flexibility about where and when those hours were occurring? Could there be like a ramp up period after leave so that parents or people who took any sort of caregiving leave could come back more slowly, right? And then with individuals, was there some openness to participating in parental leave coaching programs, right? So that they could have some support during that return to work. So it wasn't every lever, but we did get some changes at a few, right? And then again, in other cases, it may be coming in and saying, hey, here's what your workforce looks like. Here's what the, financial impact of not giving leave is. And the movable lever is the leave, right? And we talk about how can you do that in a way that feels sustainable for your organization. And here are some of the benefit providers that you can partner with, or here is the, there's kind of parental leave insurance policies for small businesses, for example, where you can kind of buy into this and then they'll help cover the parental leave expenses for your organization. So connecting them with ways to make the leave longer. So it really, really depends. But so often, and I want listeners to hear this piece, it starts with one person saying this is a problem and I want help solving this for our organization. It's almost never from the top down. So even if you're listening and you're like, I am not even in HR, or I am, a manager, but of a small group within a much larger organization, that's usually who kind of I end up partnering with to get inside an organization and start making those changes.
I love that because it really is. It's that one person who has to just wave the flag and say like, this isn't working. And I would argue that that person is probably the person who went through the whole experience already. And we're like, before I had a child, I didn't know what that was going to look like to go through because it looks like everything else, right? It looks like 12 weeks of leave and part-term, part of it short-term disability. And this just kind of is what it is. And then to go through that experience and realize, oh, wait a minute, this is terrible. And this is not, it's not as good as it sounds on paper. And how can we make that different? And I think now too, there's so many programs, there's so many companies, there's so many tools and products that are coming online built around this knowledge that companies either don't have the capacity to change because of whatever industry they're in terms of like the 12 weeks or what that is. And also that companies are willing to be more flexible and creative about it. So it's kind of you're like the orchestra conductor of like, here is the problem. And here are all these different, like a plethora of tools and ideas and trainings and things like that to come in.
Yeah. And sometimes for me, it's thinking, and again, this happens when I'm working with people on the individual level and in the organization level. It's like the outsider that can kind of come in and see a path through, right? When we're stressed as people or as an organization, we get really myopic, right? We cannot see very far in front of ourselves. That's like a normal human thing. It makes sense evolutionarily, right? Like if there's a lion chasing me and about to eat me, I need to be focused on getting away from that lion and nothing else. But that's not great for problem solving. And so, bringing in a coach on an individual level or again, a consultant on the organizational level, I can see the things that maybe that individual or organization can't and think a little bit more creatively of like, how can we get some traction? How can we get some movement? And I think even at that organizational level, sometimes it's they don't know the tools, but sometimes they don't even know that they could do it differently, right? It's like humans are very much creatures of habit. And so it's like, we've been doing this all along. Why would we make any changes? And helping them understand, well, here's why. Here's the stories of why. Here's the data of why, right? Here's the massive return on investment you get from investing in working parents. And that's part of the work too.
Yeah. And also, it's the left or the right of, that parent who goes through the experience and they either say, well, I did it and it was terrible, but I survived it, so everyone else behind me can't. Or you have that parent who's like, yeah, no, we're not going to do that anymore. I don't want to do that anymore. I don't want to ask somebody else to go through that because I know how hard it is.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think so many parents blame themselves when they're that one. I mean, that's what happened to me, right? I mean, my mom worked. She was a physician. She had a big job. Both of my parents were doctors. And I was like, oh, I'm totally going to do the same thing, right? Like, I mean, I became the quote wrong kind of doctor in that I was a psychologist rather than an MD in their mind. But I'm going to have kids. I'm going to work. It's going to be fulfilling. Great. And I get there and it was like, oh no, this is really, really, really hard. Way harder than my own mother made it look. And nobody was talking about it, right? I mean, when I had my first kid, this was 16 years ago, nobody was saying, hey, motherhood is hard. It was just what you did. And I just felt like I must be the worst mother in the entire world. I was someone who had studied the transition to motherhood in my research prior to having kids. And I still found it just really kind of rocked my world in this unanticipated way. And I blamed myself. And then I got into a couple organizations that really weren't supportive. I had my second kid. I asked for some flexibility and the answer was no. And I left to do my own thing. And it was only once I left to kind of move it more into entrepreneurship where I said, oh, this is not like actually just me. This should not have happened. And now I want to go help fix the system. And I'm still doing that work, so many years later because I see how important it is, right? Again, from all these angles, from the maternal mental health angle, but also from the organizational and kind of sustainability level.
Mm-hmm. I wonder about how many, it's like how many people would, and the entrepreneurship side, how many people, the statistics wise, and I don't know this number, I'm just thinking about it, how many people choose entrepreneurship over staying in that role, knowing that the risks of entrepreneurship are steep. And I think that's the hard part is like, it has to get to a point where it feels so impossible to stay in that space that you're in, that it feels less impossible to take this like massive leap and have even more uncertainty in order to regain control, because that's really what I feel like that's really what people are looking for, right? I have no control over when I need to be in the office, where I need to go, when, childcare is this time, it's this place, it's this cost, it's blah, 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 blah. And then it feels like everything is out of your hands and you're riding the ride, versus entrepreneurship is like, okay, yes, I have to make 80,000 decisions, but I also have to make 80,000 decisions as a parent. And I just you just want that sense of control and autonomy back. And I wonder how many people, if they went back into positions after having kids that had flexibility, that had all of those pieces, how many of those people would have stayed and how many were just on their way out anyways?
I think a lot actually of people would stay, right? If they had the support. I think I don't have the data, right? It's an interesting study. When I'm like, you've got my research wheels turning. But I think a lot of people would stay, right? Because if you have that autonomy and flexibility at work, there's a lot to be said for a more standard job than entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship comes with a lot of risk. It's also a privilege to be able to even take that risk. And I want to put that out there, right? Like I was extraordinarily privileged that I had a degree that allowed me kind of an easy road into entrepreneurship, right? Like, I mean, forming a private practice as a therapist takes entrepreneurial thinking, but it's not a heavy lift. It wasn't a huge financial investment in addition to the degree and the schooling or whatever to do that. And I also had a spouse that had a job that could cover us for the time that it took to get that up and off the ground. It had benefits, right? All of that stuff. That was privilege on my part. And not everybody has that. And again, just another reason I'm so passionate, right? Because I want women to have choices. I want them to be able to say if they want to say. Not everyone is able to. Also, not everyone temperamentally, it's not always a good fit to be an entrepreneur, right? That's not actually where everybody wants to be. So let's make it an option rather than kind of the only parachute that we have out of corporate America.
Yeah. I mean, I think that analogy is perfect, right? It's this idea of like, you are stuck. You are stuck, and the only way is to jump and just
Yeah.
sort of figure it out on the way. Yeah, no, I'm thinking about that in terms of the like from the OT lens for me on that. Kudos also. I got the wrong kind of doctorate degree per my family as well. So like solidarity there.
Yep.
Like, oh, a doctor, but like not that doctor. And I'm like, oh my God, here we go. But that idea of like what are and what would be those levers, I think that would be really interesting. It's not necessarily like we know that right now not great, and we know that the option is really scary. What would be the levers? And that's a study I feel like a lot of companies would look at, because it's not, everyone says I want affordable childcare, and I want a year of maternity leave, and I want health insurance, and I want all of these things. But if you got down to brass tacks, what are the one or two or three things that if a company started to budge on, could that have a more systemic impact on their company, but also others around, to say, hey, this is how we maybe think about changing the tide a little bit?
Yeah, I think, well, there's a lot of things that could be those levers, right? So number one, across the board, flexibility, right? And again, I think to what I was saying earlier, flexibility doesn't have to be the number of hours worked, although that is huge, right? I think there are so many women that I know personally, have worked with as clients, that, if given the option of something less than 40 hours, would take that in a heartbeat. And that was for me what I had asked for, right? Was to go somehow part-time or a job share or whatever. So definitely flexibility, certainly potentially number of hours, but also where we work, when those hours are done is another big one, right? Again, being able to say, oh, I'm going to work, for me, I work, 7:30 to 3. Those are my hours. And then when the kids were little and it was a little bit of a different ballgame, and then my husband worked later. So he would do drop off in the mornings, and then I could be there to pick them up at the end of the day, right? And that helped the balance. This was kind of pre-COVID, pre-remote world. So flexibility also around kind of crisis points or around seasons, right? Of saying, hey, can we be flexible so that, during the summer, can we have a different way of working, acknowledging that childcare in the summer is a whole separate hurdle, or around school vacation times, right? Can we have maybe a totally remote policy if that's an option during school break times, and just be aware of that. So flexibility is a huge bucket. But there are other things they can do, right? One is just like creating a culture around caregiving as valuable, right? And kind of there's that hashtag parenting out loud. But when it comes from the top down of saying parenting is allowed, and we are going to name that is part of people's lives outside of work, that can make a huge difference, right? Like if your CEO has on their schedule, Sally's dance recital, then we know that we're allowed to do that too, right? It's kind of modeling that we're allowed to care for ourselves or care for our children. There's also, with that, recognizing any sort of dual standards that and challenging those, right? I mean, I've seen a lot of times where it's like, oh, Joe coaches, his kid's baseball team. He's such a great father. But if Elizabeth is taking her daughter to soccer, then, oh, she's always like slacking on Wednesdays. Why isn't she here? Right? We have some double standards as to what is okay with caregiving between men and women. So really kind of addressing those, addressing bias. Another huge one is any sort of childcare support. I mean, childcare is astronomically expensive, as any parent knows. And so, best case scenario, big companies have in-house childcare. That's not an option for everybody. But any sort of support around childcare is a huge, huge boon. I know there has been data that people will take the financial equivalent of childcare credits over an actual just financial payout.
Yeah.
Like 95% of the time, right? Because it's such a massive investment in your ability to work. Support. And that can look a lot of different ways, right? It could be a really active ERG that has funding to bring in outside speakers and support. But the biggest one is different types of coaching, right? So there are organizations where I do like working parent groups for the organization. And gosh, what a wonderful message that sends, right? Because they're getting the coaching, they're getting the tools I'm offering. And the organization is saying, hey, we care enough about this that we are paying to bring someone in to do this for you. Or the parental leave coaching around kind of the preparing for leave and returning from leave, right? These are all ways to support your working parents kind of more on the ground level.
Mhm.
So those are options too. And there's a lot of other tools, but those are some of the really heavy hitters, if you will, that an organization can use.
For sure. I just went to the Transform, the big HR conference in Las Vegas
Mm,
this past March. And I went because I am interested in selling Dovetail into, as for companies to
yeah.
offer exactly for this, like as a caregiving support resource. But the reason I went was because I don't really understand the HR side of stuff. I don't really understand like how that all works, how the groups come together, how you as a single service or a single benefit can integrate into a larger company, a larger system, larger providers. But it was really interesting because, to hear that side of it, to hear the HR side of it, number one, the big thing was like, we know we need these things. We don't have any money to bring this stuff in. And so to me, that's a whole conversation before the conversation where we've got to, if we want to change the culture and we want to represent more people here, we can't ask HR to do that with like a rice and potatoes budget. We actually have to
Yeah.
like put our money where our mouth is so that these resources can come in. And then also there was another panel discussion. It was talking about caregiving, which apparently I haven't gone before, so I didn't know this, but the fact that there were a few panel discussions devoted to caregiving was huge for the conference this year because in the past they haven't, right? They talk about like efficiency and onboarding and now there's a lot of different programs that are helping facilitate leave for people and keeping track of all that stuff. But there was a panel and they said flexibility is no longer an option. And everyone in the room was like, yeah, no, like absolutely. This is HR leaders from companies all over the country and they're saying, we understand it's no longer an option. If flexibility is not a nice to have, that's how you retain your employees because people are not willing to stay in a space that does not match with them anymore, and they will go like we don't live in the 50-year gold watch and a sheet cake and a thank you so much Bob for all of your time kind of place
Right.
anymore. Like people will move every couple years or as often as they need to have a job where yes, the hours worked and how they work and all of that stuff aligns, but also so that these benefits align with the benefits that they need. And I thought it was people that I met there were like, we've never heard people talk about this to this degree before. And so to me, that's a really hopeful piece.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think there is a lot to be hopeful about. And I think there are two ways to affect change at an organizational level. And one is stories, right? Or someone getting it on that guttural level. And the other is the financial argument. And I think the financial argument has been made and is pretty clear at this point. And, again, whether or not everybody listens to it, but it's like an 18-1 ROI on policy that supports working parents. If you think about it from the retention angle, it costs minimum of 1.5 times someone's salary to replace them.
Mm-hmm.
And when people leave, right, there's lost institutional knowledge, there's lost client relationships potentially, depending on your organization. It's a big hit and it hits morale too, right? Because once someone leaves, it kind of trickles down. And again, that's exactly what played out when I left. So I was at Harvard, I was at the counseling center working as a psychologist. I left because like I said, I had my second kid. I needed a little more flexibility. They weren't willing to give it. And lo and behold, about every 3 to 6 months, I'd get a phone call from another clinician saying, hey, how did you leave? Because they're still not offering flexibility. And I told them it would happen on the way out the door. And they were like, well, we don't believe you. Now, I do
Mm-hmm.
think, again, 16 years later, they have made some changes, but it is that process of once someone leaves, everybody sees that and it becomes part of their knowledge or story. And even people that aren't parents, especially aren't parents yet, see it and start thinking, is this an organization where I can stay and be a parent? So you might even lose people kind of preemptively in addition to the people that you lose because of this kind of bind of working parenthood.
Yeah, yeah. When you've got people who are like, well, I know that this is not going to be the place for me. It works right now, but it's not going to be the place for me when I have kids. Or, if we're talking about the whole caregiving spectrum, like my parent was just diagnosed with such and such, and I know that I'm going to have to increase that. So how am I
Yeah.
going to, people start creating off ramps
Mm-hmm.
and you don't want that because when they start creating off ramps, then their options are no longer you as the one and only in their life.
Right. It's too late essentially at that point, right? And, that's what I see happen so much in my work as a coach, where people who are coming to, like a very common question is, should I quit my job? And a lot of times, by the time they're coming to see me and asking, should I quit my job? It's actually, I need to quit my job and I just need support around how I'm going to do that and what my next step is going to be, right? Because they've already recognized they're not getting the support they need. And again, that's why we have to put this stuff in place kind of preventatively.
Yeah. Yeah, agreed. Today's episode is brought to you by Dovetail, the app that's changing the way families navigate caregiving. If you're juggling your kids' schedules, checking in on your parents, and trying to manage your own needs, Dovetail is made for you. I built Dovetail as a clinician and caregiver who saw firsthand how overwhelming this role can be and how much lighter it feels when the care is shared. Download Dovetail now on iOS, Google Play, coming soon. And then, so for you, going through the process of building the practice and the consulting and the coaching and all of that stuff, how did you navigate that? Because yes, you have all that flexibility by creating these different streams as you're going and growing that way, but also having 4 kids. So like, how did you navigate that balance not balance. I hate the word balance. How did you navigate like all of those competing energy components?
Yeah. Well, and I'll just on the word balance, I don't hate it. I just ask people to shift to balancing, right? Shift it from a noun to a verb, because balance is not a steady state, but it is a kind of a dance, right? If you think about if you're listening to this, maybe not if you're in the car, but if you're just washing the dishes or whatever, take a second and stand on one leg and notice what happens on a micro level. You are making all sorts of movements, right? I mean, you might be making really big movements where you're wiggling, but also like every fiber in your ankle is kind of shifting around as you adjust. We are constantly moving when we are balancing. And that's life, right? Because your kid's going to get sick. Your parent is going to get sick. Work is going to have a massive deadline show up out of the blue. Something is going to stop working in your computer. We just are going to get thrown chaos. Like life is lifey, right? And so we have to give ourselves the option of tilting really far in one direction and recognizing that that is balancing too, right? And that we can just plan almost on moving back and forth. And when we do that, we're more resilient, we're more adaptive, right? We're less likely to fall over entirely. So in that kind of spirit, what does it look like? Well, I didn't do it all at once. I left and I had a very small private practice at first that was, a small handful of clients. Initially, it was just on Saturday mornings. And in hindsight, I should have gotten childcare because I was like, I'm only making money when I see clients, so I won't get childcare. I'll do all of the admin when they're napping. That was not a good plan, right? Not even a little bit, because anyone that's a parent knows that like an infant and a 2-year-old are not going to nap on the same schedule, despite any efforts that you put into making this happen. So I did a private practice, and that I grew it slowly as I had the bandwidth. And then I added in the coaching because I got to a point where I said, I love my clinical work. It's so important to me. And I can't increase those hours anymore and still show up as the parent I want to, because of how intense that work is, especially during the pandemic. And people were really, really struggling. And I had a capacity limit that I became aware of in terms of being able to do that deep caretaking work. And so I still do it, but again, it's half of what I do. And now I do these other components, and I've just kind of layered them on as I've had the bandwidth, in part because my kids have gotten older, and in part because I've gotten more interested in different things. And the different things have allowed me to make use of different chunks of time, right? So I can see clients during the school day. My kids are in school. I'm writing a book, and I've done a lot of that and at gymnastics practice in the waiting room, or sitting on the soccer sidelines, or whatever it is. or sitting at the dining room table while my kids are doing homework and I'm doing paperwork, right? So I've done a lot of these other things in a way that kind of works with my kids. And that's worked for me. But again, I do want to put out there, like, yes, I have these lots of these different options, but I didn't do it all at once. And it has been this kind of sensation of seasons, and trying to be respectful of what my kids needed. And again, that wasn't like consistently more time as they got older either, because there've been, I have a kid that had a massive health crisis. I had to take 6 weeks off of work for that. And that was only a couple of years ago. So it does even as they get older, things, life still throws you curveballs, right? Things still come up. You are still very much caregiving. And again, that balance just kind of moves and shifts. And I think for me, it's been a process of just saying, okay, that is what this is probably for the rest of my life to some extent. And so being really accepting of that process.
Yeah, I think that is really important to point out, because I think that when people think about, I'm going to leave my job and I'm going to start something, I'm going to consult, or I'm going to open a practice, or I'm going to do whatever it is, that you have to acknowledge what your real capacity is. And maybe your real capacity is the same as the 40 hours. You just need to be able to do it. Whatever the thing is that you're creating, you just need to be able to do it from home, right? Like that's, you can make it make sense that way. But when people get into this idea of like, I'm just going to go and do this now, and it's going to be at this level, but I'm not going to acknowledge that it takes so much time to get it to that space and to grow and evolve with it over time. I think that's where it gets really tricky or really scary for people in terms of like making that leap and that decision out. And then true, like when your kids get older, and I can totally relate to that. Like the kids are the same ages, but your kids are 4 years older than mine. So I have 12, 10, 7, and 5. And they are like the stuff that I could do when my youngest was born. Well, it was also the pandemic.
Yeah.
I couldn't do anything, right? I could organize school for the older two and try and keep the third from like, climbing the outside of the staircase, and try and feed the fourth one. Like there was no way I was going to be recording podcast episodes and going to conferences and all of this stuff. And I did have that time of like, I'm not going to be able to ever like grow this business because I have all of this stuff going on. And it's just it's that myopic view that we're talking about. Like,
yes,
everything is chaos. And so it's just focusing on the thing. It's the Olaf, right? Focusing on the things that you can focus on, and letting, having to let other things go or drop off for a little while. That I think that people that are thinking about entering into entrepreneurship really need to know that that is a huge part of the deal and the decision.
Yeah. Yeah. We always see the after. We don't see the during, right? And I think as a parent, I always try to remember like there's a moment in parenting. I think everyone can relate to that feeling of like, that your kid's 3 months old and they still aren't sleeping through the night, and you're up in the middle of the night. I mean, I even with my third and fourth, when I know the drill, right? I remember walking circles around my kitchen with a crying baby at 3 a.m, being like, this child will never sleep, and neither will I. I know that that's not true, but in the moment, it feels like that will last forever and that you will never get out of it. And, lo and behold, 3 months later or 6 months later, you have almost a different baby, right? Like it's a different experience. And that's true kind of throughout our lives, right? Whatever feels like I can't make traction here, that's okay. Like there may be seeds that are germinating and we don't even see that, right? When all that stuff is happening underground, we don't have a sprout to look at, but there's still a lot of growth and change and shifts that are happening, and kind of trying to trust that, which is hard.
Oh my gosh, so hard. And I mean, you're also like, you're trying to grow towards the sun, man, no matter what. If you're stuck underground or you're already fully bloomed and like living your best plant life, you're always just trying to get to the next thing.
Yeah. But I think that's the other part of it, and that I'm really trying to embrace in my own life and get my clients to, is like try to find like having fun in the process, right? That like I talk a lot about healthy striving versus unhealthy striving. And I think so many of us are kind of frame our lives or live our lives in this unhealthy striving model where we are going after things because we're afraid of failing. We're going after things because we are told that that's what we're supposed to go after, because that's what we think ambition looks like, because that's how everyone else defines success, or because we're afraid of making a mistake, right? But it is that striving that feels like I have to just push and I cannot rest because it will deter me or it will be a problem or whatever. And I really like to help people shift into a model of healthy striving. And with healthy striving, we are going after something that is aligned and kind of feels true for us, that reflects what we are ambitious for, not everybody else. And with that comes permission to rest, because ideally, if it's healthy striving, you're kind of enjoying the journey. You're enjoying the process along the way. And so, yeah, the outcome is important, but it's also like it's not just the outcome, right? It is also the getting there that is really, really valuable. And making that shift is huge. When clients get it and figure it out for themselves, it's like the whole, it's like the sun comes out, right? It is this process of, oh my God, right? And I can use this book I'm working on as a great example of, I've enjoyed writing. It's not done yet. It's almost done. It's going to be in the publisher in the next month. But like, I've loved the process of doing it all along. And that's actually been the whole point, is writing it. And we'll see what happens as it comes out. And, but the fact that I have enjoyed it is the most important thing to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the concept of getting your own measuring stick. It's like,
Right.
we don't get one. You don't go to Home Depot or whatever and go grab a yardstick and everyone else has the same yardstick. Like you get to make your own. And, one person's life, like someone who lives in Manhattan who wants to work on Wall Street and do all of those things, like maybe that's their yardstick. I couldn't want anything less than that. And that doesn't mean that one is good and one is not good. It's just got to be your own.
Yeah. And I think that's the important thing to make space for is, right, like there's nothing wrong with being ambitious for a title or for power or for even for income, right? There's nothing wrong with those. It's just that there's other options too, right? That are all equally valid. And we're all, as humans, we're going to have some diversity in what we're going after. And that's a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
So figure out for you what it is for you.
Yeah. Do you have clients that are, because I think that sometimes what happens for women, for working moms, is this idea of like, we focus on the kids and we focus on like, I want to be able to spend more time with my kids and I want to be able to like go to school drop off and go to school pickup and stuff like that. But I feel like there's another section of women who are like, and not necessarily a separate section, but there's a group of women that are like, I went to school to get this degree, to do this. I want to make this money. I want to do that. And I feel like that is not always represented well for companies. It's like women that own their awesomeness, as all women should, but they own their awesomeness and their experience and stuff like that. But they are also driving for things that are not school drop off. So they're leaving companies because they know that they can do better on their own. They know that they have the skills and all of that. Like, do you work with clients that are also navigating that? So I feel like that's isolating, really isolating.
Yes, totally. That's definitely a big group of the clients I work with who happen to be mothers, but also want big careers, right? And I think as a mom, ambition is a dirty word. Mm-hmm. Culturally, right? Because I think we are told we are selfish if we want a big career and kids, or that somehow we are not being a good enough mom if we're not there for the pickup and the drop off. And that is not true, right? The data is pretty clear on this, right? That work or no work, parents, it doesn't actually matter, right? It's not even about how much time we spend with our kids. Like they have done like time use studies, and for kids under 11, there is no correlation between the amount of time you spend with your kids and their kind of mental health outcomes. It's about the quality of that time. And that is a very, very important distinction. They've looked at working moms versus stay-at-home moms. There's no difference in happiness of kids long-term. There's no difference, again, in the mental health of kids. So just to like acknowledge that, like, I think part of the problem is it's hard for women to speak about that ambition without feeling like they're going to get shamed from the mom side of it. And yet for so many women I know, like motherhood clarified and amplifies their ambition of here's exactly what I want to do. And this is the impact I want to make. This is the career I want to have. This is the modeling I want to do for my own kids. And that's actually a huge part of my book, right, is looking at ambition in motherhood and how motherhood can be the fuel rather than the smothering that we traditionally say. But the other thing I think you're touching on, right, is that motherhood penalty that shows up whether you become a mother or not, let's be clear, and that women are penalized at work, not only for being mothers, but for the potential to be mothers. They are written off, even if they're not mothers, as someone who might become a mother and therefore should not be given quite as much responsibility. And so we start to get into the gender dynamics and equity and sexism at work and how that plays out. And so a lot of times, especially because I do work with women in these male dominated industries, it is, how can I navigate that as a woman and still grow? And sometimes it is, a lot of times it is leaving for a different company in those cases. Not always. Sometimes it is kind of managing up and figuring out how to work within these systems so that they can get into a place of power and affect change on the way down. But sometimes it is leaving. And, in those organizations, those are also not the organizations that are necessarily going to bring me in, right? Because they don't even see it's a problem from a gender dynamic, let alone from the motherhood dynamic.
Yeah, I remember my first clinical, I went and my supervisor said to me, because I was married, I was 25. I think I was like 25. And I was married. I got married young, and she was not married. This is another woman. She's only a couple years older than me. Was not married, and was like, "Oh, are you gonna like go and get pregnant now?" And I was like, "What? Like, we're day 2. I'm 25. Like, lady, I don't know how to tell you this, but like, I'm eating toast for dinner because I'm on clinical and in grad school and like, waiting tables and all this stuff." But that was the first time that I was like, I don't think you can ask that question. And also, no.
No, she should not have asked that question. And also, but she asked it and other people are thinking it. And I think
Yeah.
it's really important to put that out there, because I think I talk so much about supporting working moms, but again, these dynamics affect women regardless of whether they have children.
Yeah. And people, it's that like, oh, there's, I working in healthcare, right? Like it's dominant, the therapy part that I was in, mostly women. Nursing, mostly women. Someone's pregnant. All of a sudden, there's, not all of a sudden, but there's another person that's pregnant. And then the jokes about like, oh, there's something in the water and yada, yada. Like at one point, this hospital we had 33 beds in the hospital. We had 6 between nursing and therapy. I think we had 6 people that were pregnant at the same time. And everyone was like, oh, ha, ha, ha. And it's like, well, this is the phase of life. But then all those 6 people went out on maternity leave, and not all those 6 people came back from maternity leave, me being one of them. Because of that, we'll just slot in another person right behind you. And so there's industries where the onus is not really on the company because they know that they can fill that position behind you. And I always am concerned for that, because if there's no need for change, or there's no immediacy stated for change, then the people that go into those careers, it's almost like accepting that at the outset, that if this is the spot that you want to work, this is the industry and this is the location and this is the type of work that you want to do, that's part of your trade-off that you're making to get into that. And I think that is really scary for the future for women in healthcare and those types of jobs.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, to me, what I find hopeful but frustrating, right, is, I recently got to interview Claudia Golden, who is not a mom herself, but she's a PhD in economics, and she won the Nobel Prize for her work on the kind of division of labor and the impact that has on workplace settings. And, she was like, it's pretty clear that even with jobs like healthcare, kind of greedy jobs that will kind of take all your hours from you, we can make it so that there is flexibility at work. Right. And she was talking about the ability, like an OB's office is a perfect example, right? You've got like 12 OBs, and then they just get really good at communicating about their patients so that not one person is on call all the time for their own patients. Right. And I can speak to that as a patient. Like, my OB didn't deliver any of my kids because she just wasn't on call that night. And it was fine. Right. So we have models of how to do this and how to allow for flexibility that work. We just have to use them, right? And to say like, okay, if it works in a physician setting, there's no reason we couldn't have that work in a law firm or in a finance firm or any other career where there can be more communication and make it more accessible and have people go out on leave and feel supported to take the time they need. These changes are doable. We just have to kind of as a society and as corporations decide that we want to make that happen.
Yeah, it's putting that at the top of the list. So given the work that you do and the research and all of those pieces, what do you envision for the next like 5 to 10 years? I say 5, but 5 feels really short, even though it's 5 years. But the next 5 to 10 years, like, because there is so much conversation now around affordable childcare, accessible childcare, about paid leave and all of that. Like, do you see the ball rolling, or is it just
I'm an optimist at heart, right? I think to some extent as a therapist, like you have to be an optimist, right? Like I believe that people can change. I believe that we can make things move. I think we are at an interesting juncture for that politically, we'll say. And I think what you're going to see right now is some organizations doubling down on making changes and some completely washing their hands of it, the way we have seen with DEI. But I know, for example, the whole reason that we have paid leave at all, is because organizations did it, right? It did not come from a policy level. The policy has kind of slowly followed what organizations have done. And I think we're going to see kind of a similar thing. The question mark in my mind is all of this push to pay people to have kids that's coming more from a keep women at home and having babies perspective than from a really supporting parents perspective. And I don't know what to make of that or how that's going to play out. But I do think you're seeing organizations who get it. And I think when they get it and they're successful and they're recruiting top talent, that will kind of trickle down into other organizations as well. And then there are going to be organizations and even maybe whole sectors that say, we're not even dealing with this. And, I think 5 years down the road, they're not going to be any different.
I also wonder about the organizations that don't do this and the rise of AI and how many of those positions will be either eliminated or combined because of our increased reliance on technology, and whether or not that's going to be helpful for the case for working moms or not helpful. Like, is it, if there's not a seat in a chair, will they find a way to work around to combine 2 or 3 roles into one and then supplement AI in there for that?
Yeah. And I think AI is the piece where I'm still trying to figure out myself, let alone predict how this will play out in workplaces. But I think the other factor is in the next couple of years, we're really going to start to see Gen Z like being a massive part of the workforce, and even into, in 5 years, we're going to have whatever alpha is going to be in college. Like there's like some shifting happening in terms of who is working. And I could see that playing out to make some change too.
Yeah, I will say the people that were speaking at the Transform conference the session that I went to were younger and younger parents, and, had these like crazy, incredible positions. And it was, I came into this was my experience. And to your point, saying, I don't want this to be, and I know that, I don't need to babysit somebody all day long doing this role. And so that's, I do think that there are cracks there that can be, widened for change to make its way into. Fingers crossed, hopefully.
For sure.
And so your book, so that comes out, you said you don't have a date on it, but next year?
2026. That's the publisher will give me a date once they have the draft. I could do a whole separate podcast on the inside take on the publishing industry, but basically they'll look at all of their projects that they have in the pipeline and then decide for them what makes the most sense in terms of release timing. But sometime in 2026.
And the book is about ambition in
Ambition in Motherhood. The working title right now is The Ambition Paradox, and it is all about working mother and kind of the motherhood and the bind we find ourselves in and how we got there, some of the ways that we can change internally, and some of the systemic stuff that we can change or that needs to change as well.
I love it. I think that this episode will come out around that time. So I'm hoping that when this airs, we'll have a date that we can let people know, because that would be awesome. I love the concept. Do love the title and can't wait to read it.
Yeah, thank you.
How about if you let everyone know where they can find you? I'm hoping that there are a lot of people that are listening that are wanting to be that one person at work to bring change in. So how can people find you and work with you?
Yeah, I mean, the most common place to find me is in the Zoom room, coaching my working moms group or talking to organizations. But more concretely, LinkedIn is a great place to find me. I'm Dr. Ann Welsh. I'm on there almost every workday. My website is drannwelsh.com. So that's another great way to find out about all of my services.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. And I cannot wait for people to hear more and read more.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.